A sleek obsidian black Aston Martin, DB11, tore through the city streets, its engine a low growl of pure power. Behind the wheel, Christopher Davies, a man whose net worth was discussed in financial journals, glanced at the passenger seat. There, Brooke Summers, stunning and artfully distressed, clutched her stomach. This was an emergency, a detour from his carefully planned life. His phone buzzed on the console, flashing a picture of his pregnant wife, Jessica. He ignored it. He was busy being the hero for the woman beside him. He pulled into the exclusive private entrance of the city's most prestigious medical facility, a place built for the elite. He was about to demand the best for the best. He had no idea he was a guest in a kingdom he never knew existed, walking into a judgment he could never have foreseen. The Hartman Medical Center wasn't just a hospital, it was a statement. Its gleaming glass and steel facade rose into the skyline like a monument to modern medicine and immense wealth. Valets in crisp grey uniforms moved with silent efficiency accustomed to the city's most powerful figures. Christopher Davies didn't wait for one. He brought the Aston Martin to a screeching halt directly in front of the main entrance, leaving the engine running as he vaulted out. "Help, I need a doctor. Now!" He barked, his voice accustomed to instant obedience. He rounded the car to help Brooke, who managed a convincingly feeble moan as she leaned heavily against him. She was an actress by ambition, and today she was giving the performance of a lifetime. A slight dizzy spell after a champagne brunch had been masterfully spun into a potential medical crisis that required Christopher's immediate undivided attention. "My stomach," she whispered, her hand splayed dramatically below her ribs. "It's a sharp pain, Chris. It came out of nowhere." Christopher's face was a mask of concern, but his mind was on logistics. Get in, get the best doctor, throw some money around, and get out. This was an inconvenient but manageable interruption. His phone buzzed again. Jessica. He silenced it with a flick of his thumb. He'd call her back later and tell her he was stuck in a last-minute board meeting. It was his go-to excuse, and she never questioned it. Why would she? She was sweet, trusting, simple Jessica. The perfect, stable backdrop for his dynamic life. A team of orderlies approached with a wheelchair, their professionalism a stark contrast to Christopher's manufactured panic. "We need a private suite, the best one you have, and I want to see the chief of medicine immediately," Christopher demanded, already pulling out his platinum credit card as if it were a scepter. The lead orderly, a man with a calm, weathered face, simply nodded. "We'll take care of the patient, sir. Please see the admissions desk inside for the necessary arrangements." Christopher scoffed. Arrangements were for other people. Just bill whatever it is to this card. Davies. Christopher Davies, CEO of Kronos Innovations. The name should be sufficient. He expected a flicker of recognition, a change in posture, the deference he was so used to. He got none. The orderly focused entirely on settling Brooke into the wheelchair, his movements gentle and practiced. Brooke, for her part, offered a weak smile to Christopher, her eyes fluttering closed. As they wheeled her inside, Christopher followed, his expensive Italian shoes clicking impatiently on the polished marble floor. The lobby was less like a hospital and more like a five-star hotel. A cascading waterfall flowed down a granite wall, the sound a soothing murmur. Abstract art, the kind that cost more than a suburban house, adorned the walls. He strode to the main reception desk, a sweeping curve of polished mahogany. "I'm Christopher Davies," he announced to the receptionist, a poised woman with a headset. "The patient is Brooke Summers. I've requested the chief of medicine and a VIP suite. Please expedite this." The receptionist typed something into her computer, her expression unreadable. "1 moment, sir." Christopher tapped his fingers on the desk, his patience wearing thin. He wasn't used to waiting. He wasn't used to being treated like just another person. He looked around, noting the discreet brass plaque near the entrance, the Hartman Medical Center. A common name, he mused. Probably some long-dead philanthropist. It meant nothing to him. His phone buzzed a third time. A text message from Jessica. "Hey, just calling to check in. Hope the meeting is going well. The baby's kicking like a soccer player today. Call me when you can. Love you." A pang of something he refused to identify as guilt pricked at him. He quickly suppressed it. Jessica was fine. She was always fine. She was at home, nesting, doing whatever pregnant women did. She was safe. Brooke, however, needed him. It was a simple, self-serving justification, but it was enough. "Sir," the receptionist said, her voice pulling him back. "Dr. Peterson will be down to speak with you shortly. If you'd like to take a seat." "I don't want to take a seat." He snapped, his voice a low growl. "I want a doctor for my friend. Is that so difficult to understand? Or do I need to speak to the person who runs this place and explain how customer service works?" The receptionist remained unnervingly calm. "Dr. Peterson is the chief of medicine, sir. She is the person you requested." Before Christopher could retort, a woman in a crisp white coat approached. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and grey-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her name tag read, "Dr. Ann Peterson, Chief of Medicine." "Miss Davies," she said, her voice level and devoid of the awe he expected. "I'm Dr. Peterson. I was told you had some concerns." "Concerns?" Christopher laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "My friend is in severe pain, and we're being held up by bureaucracy. I want her in a room, diagnosed and treated. Now. I'm prepared to pay any price." Dr. Peterson's gaze was steady. "All our patients are treated with the utmost urgency and care, Mr. Davies. Ms. Summers has been taken to an examination room in our emergency wing. A top diagnostician is with her now. We don't expedite care based on credit limits. We do it based on medical need." The polite professional condescension was infuriating. It was a language Christopher wasn't used to hearing. He felt his control, the very foundation of his world, slipping. "Perhaps you don't understand," he said, leaning closer, lowering his voice to an intimidating hiss. "I am a very influential man. A hospital like this relies on donors, on patrons. It would be a shame if a facility with such a fine reputation were to suddenly find itself with a very powerful, very vocal critic." Dr. Peterson didn't even blink. Instead, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and knew it. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential, almost pitying tone. "You seem to be under a number of misapprehensions, but don't worry. I think they are all about to be cleared up." From down the hall, the quiet, rhythmic squeak of orthopedic shoes grew louder. A new figure was approaching. Christopher turned, expecting another doctor or an administrator he could finally intimidate. But the face he saw sent a jolt of ice-cold dread through his entire body. It was Jessica, his pregnant wife. And she wasn't smiling. Jessica moved with a quiet grace that Christopher had always mistaken for meekness. Her pregnancy had softened her features, but today her blue eyes, usually so warm, were as hard and cold as glacial ice. She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on Dr. Peterson. Anne, Jessica said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the sterile hum of the lobby. Is there a problem here? Christopher's mind raced, trying to compute this impossible scenario. What was Jessica doing here? A checkup, a false alarm with the baby. It had to be a coincidence, a terrible, universe-shattering coincidence. No problem at all, Jessica, Dr. Peterson replied, her tone shifting from professional coolness to one of genuine warmth and respect. Mr. Davies was just expressing his concerns about our hospital's procedures. Jessica's eyes finally settled on Christopher. The look in them was not one of surprise or hurt, not yet. It was a look of profound, weary disappointment. It was the look of someone whose worst suspicions had just been confirmed. My husband, Jessica said, the words perfectly articulated, can be very enthusiastic, especially when he's worried about a friend. The slight pause before the word friend was a scalpel expertly wielded. Christopher felt sweat prickle on his neck. He had to take control of this narrative, and fast. Jess, what are you doing here? I was just... A colleague from work, Brooke Summers. She suddenly collapsed. I had to rush her here. I was about to call you. He stammered the lie, tasting like ash in his mouth. Jessica's expression didn't change. You didn't have to call me Christopher. I was already here. I had my 32-week scan this afternoon. You would have known that if you'd read the text I sent you this morning. The text? He'd glanced at it, registered something about an appointment, and immediately dismissed it as non-urgent. His board meeting had seemed more important. The meeting ran long, sweetheart. It was unavoidable, he said, trying to inject a note of apologetic sincerity into his voice. He reached for her arm, a gesture of ownership and control. She took a small step back, avoiding his touch. The rejection was subtle, but in the silent, charged atmosphere of the lobby, it felt like a gunshot. Dr. Peterson, Jessica said, turning back to the chief of medicine, my husband was demanding a private suite and your personal attention for his colleague. Please make sure Ms. Summers receives the standard excellent level of care we provide to all our patients. No special treatment is necessary or warranted. Dr. Peterson nodded. Of course, Jessica. She then looked at Christopher. If you'll excuse me, I have other patients to attend to. Your friend is in good hands. With a final meaningful look at Jessica, she turned and walked away. The lobby suddenly felt vast and empty. The receptionist was studiously ignoring them. The waterfall seemed to mock him with its serene indifference. Christopher was left alone with his wife, and for the first time in their marriage, he felt utterly powerless. Jess, let me explain. He began, his voice dropping. Explain what? She asked, her tone dangerously quiet. Explain why your colleague is a 25-year-old aspiring model who you've been having lunches with for the past 6 months. Lunches that, according to your credit card statements, have been happening at boutique hotels. Or should we talk about the jewelry from Cartier that you bought last month? A corporate gift, I believe you called it. Christopher was stunned into silence. He had been so arrogant, so sure of his own cleverness, so dismissive of her intelligence. He saw her as the gentle, unassuming wife who managed their home and social calendar. He never imagined she was paying attention. He never imagined she was capable of this cold, analytical dissection of his deceit. How did you know? He whispered. A humorless smile touched Jessica's lips. You're not a careful man, Christopher. You're a careless one. You think because I don't run a tech company that I don't understand how the world works. That was your first mistake. She gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. My family has been in the business of managing complex systems for a very long time." The way she said it sent a chill down his spine. Her family. The Hartmans. He'd met her parents a few times before they passed away. He remembered them as quiet old money types. Her father, Robert Hartman, had been a retired investor who, in Christopher's opinion, lacked any real killer instinct. Her mother had been a society woman, dedicated to charity. He had patronized them, seeing them as relics of a bygone era. He saw their wealth as old and stagnant, nothing like the dynamic, disruptive fortune he was building. He looked from Jessica's face to the brass plaque on the wall. The Hartman Medical Center. The name wasn't a coincidence. His mind was struggling to connect the dots. The name on the building, the deference Dr. Peterson showed Jessica, the way she had spoken of her family. It was like watching a puzzle assemble itself, and the final picture was one he couldn't comprehend. "Hartman," he said aloud, the name feeling foreign and heavy on his tongue. "This place, it's named after my father," Jessica finished for him, her voice flat. "He founded it 30 years ago. He and my grandfather built this entire medical foundation from the ground up." The foundation of Christopher's world didn't just crack, it shattered. He had married Jessica Hartman, seeing her as a pretty well-bred accessory to his life. He knew she had a trust fund, a comfortable inheritance he'd always mentally categorized as her little nest egg. He had no idea. He had been living in a palace thinking it was a cottage, and had never once bothered to look up at the ceiling. Your family owns this hospital," he stammered, the question sounding absurd even to his own ears. Jessica's gaze hardened. "Christopher, my family doesn't just own the hospital. We own the building, the land it's on, the pharmaceutical research lab in the West Wing, the medical supply company that stocks it, and the charitable foundation that oversees it all." She paused, letting the weight of her words land with the force of a physical blow. "I don't just have a nest egg. I am the chairman of the board. And you," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any scream, "just brought your mistress to my hospital." The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from Christopher's lungs. Chairman of the board. The title seemed alien, impossible when applied to his wife. Jessica was the woman who organized dinner parties, who reminded him to call his mother, who was carrying his child. She was not a titan of industry. She couldn't be. His entire perception of their life together tilted on its axis. The quiet dinners with her parents, which he had endured with smug condescension, suddenly replayed in his mind. He remembered her father, Robert, speaking softly about endowment management and biotech portfolios. Christopher had dismissed it as the ramblings of a hobbyist. He now realized he had been a child, listening to giants discuss the creation of worlds. That's not possible," he managed to say, the denial a reflex. You handle charity balls, not board meetings. And you thought those charity balls, which raise 8 figures in a single night, just organize themselves?" Jessica countered, her voice sharp. "You saw what you wanted to see, Chris. A docile domestic wife who wouldn't ask too many questions. It was a convenient fantasy for you, and I allowed you to have it. That was my mistake." He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The simple, elegant dress she wore probably cost more than his suit. The quiet confidence he'd mistaken for passivity was actually the profound stillness of immense power. She hadn't needed his flashy world of venture capital and hostile takeovers. She had been living in a world of her own, one so far above his, he hadn't even been able to perceive it. "Why?" he asked, the question laced with a pathetic bewilderment. "Why wouldn't you tell me the extent of it?" "Tell you?" she asked, a genuine, bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I tried in the beginning. Do you remember when I tried to talk to you about the Hartman Foundation's new investment in robotic surgery? You patted my hand and said, "That's nice, honey," before spending the next hour boasting about a new app your company had acquired. You never asked a single follow-up question. You never showed a shred of genuine interest in my life, my family, or my legacy. You only ever saw me as a reflection of yourself. Every word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of his arrogance. He had been so blind, so wrapped up in his own self-importance. He thought he was the sun, and she was a minor planet caught in his orbit. The reality was that he had been a small moon orbiting a star he didn't even know was there. His phone buzzed. He instinctively glanced down. It was a notification from his bank. He ignored it. "So this is it," he said, trying to find some footing, some way to regain control. "You bring me to your kingdom to humiliate me." "Don't flatter yourself, Christopher. My day does not revolve around you," she said coldly. "As I told you, I had a doctor's appointment. You chose to bring your affair to my front door. This humiliation is entirely of your own making." As if on cue, a large, imposing man in a dark suit materialized beside them. He was built like a former linebacker, with a calm, watchful presence. He nodded respectfully at Jessica. "Mr. Henderson," she greeted him. "Is there an update? Ms. Summers has been diagnosed with mild dehydration and acute anxiety," the man Henderson reported in a low, rumbling voice. "Dr. Matthews has recommended she be given IV fluids and discharged within the hour." Mild dehydration. The entire dramatic life-or-death emergency that had ripped his afternoon apart was nothing more than a case of a young woman needing a glass of water. The absurdity of it all was a fresh wave of humiliation. "And her bill?" Jessica asked. "As per your instructions, it will be sent to Mr. Davies's personal account, not his corporate one," Henderson confirmed. Jessica nodded. "Thank you, Robert. Could you please escort my husband to the cafeteria? I believe he and I have a few more things to discuss, and I'd prefer a more private setting." "Of course, Mrs. Davies." Henderson turned his impassive gaze on Christopher. "Sir, if you'll come with me." It wasn't a request. Christopher looked from the mountain of a man to his wife. The power dynamic had shifted so completely it gave him vertigo. He was no longer a CEO in control. He was a misbehaving child being sent to the principal's office. He had no choice but to follow. The hospital cafeteria was as elegant as the rest of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a manicured garden. But Jessica didn't lead him to one of the comfortable booths. She guided him to a stark, functional table in a secluded corner under the unflattering glare of a fluorescent light. Henderson stood at a discreet but unmissable distance. Jessica sat down, placing her hands on her swollen belly in a protective gesture. She slid a sleek, dark blue folder across the table. "I had hoped to have this conversation under different circumstances," she began, her voice devoid of its earlier anger, replaced now by a chilling, businesslike tone. "I was hoping we could discuss this at home after the baby was born, but you've forced my hand." Christopher stared at the folder. He didn't want to open it. He knew that whatever was inside would be the final definitive end of the life he knew. "Jess, please." He tried, his voice hoarse. "We can fix this. I made a mistake. A horrible, stupid mistake. But we have a baby coming. Our family. Our family." She cut him off, her voice dangerously soft. "The family you were betraying while I was at home carrying your son. The family you neglected so you could play benefactor to a woman suffering from anxiety." She pushed the folder closer to him. "Open it, Christopher." With trembling hands, he opened the folder. The first page was a document from a forensic accounting firm. It was a detailed analysis of the finances of Kronos Innovations, his company. His pride and joy. His eyes scanned the columns of numbers, the highlighted transactions, the damning summaries. He felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just about his affair. This was about everything. The seed money for Kronos. Jessica said, her voice a clinical narration of his doom. You told me you secured it from a consortium of angel investors in Silicon Valley. A brilliant pitch, you said. They were begging to get in on the ground floor. He looked up at her, his heart pounding in his chest. But there were no angel investors, were there, Chris? She continued. The initial $5 million, the money that started it all, was funneled from one of my family's legacy trust accounts, an account you gained access to when we consolidated our finances after our wedding, an account you must have thought was just some forgotten pot of money. He couldn't speak. She knew. She knew his darkest, most foundational secret. He wasn't a self-made man. He was a thief. You didn't build an empire, Christopher, she said, her voice sealing his fate. You stole the foundation of one and built a shack on it, and the rent is now due. The sterile air of the cafeteria felt thick, heavy, and suffocating. Christopher stared at the forensic accounting report, but the numbers blurred into meaningless symbols. The only thing he could see clearly was the abyss that had opened up beneath him. The affair was a symptom. This was the disease. His entire success story, the narrative he had built his identity around, was a fraud. How could you do this? He whispered the question, ludicrously aimed at her, as if she were the perpetrator. Spying on me. Hiring accountants. You call it spying. I call it due diligence. Jessica retorted, her composure absolute. Did you really think I wouldn't keep an eye on the family trusts my father taught me to read a balance sheet before I learned to ride a bicycle? The discrepancies started small about 18 months ago. A few $100,000 here, $500,000 there. You were clever routing it through shell corporations. You probably thought it was an insignificant amount, lost in the noise of multi-billion-dollar portfolios. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. But it was a pattern, and it was my money. So I hired the best forensic accountants in the country. Not to spy on my husband, but to protect my family's assets from a potential threat. It turns out the threat was sleeping in my bed. He felt a desperate, primal urge to defend himself, to twist the narrative. I was going to pay it back. With interest. The company is a huge success. The valuation is through the roof. It was an investment. I used that money to build something incredible for us. For us. Jessica's laugh was sharp and brittle. Was the penthouse apartment you leased on the other side of town for us? Was the Porsche you bought Brooke for her birthday for us? Was this entire secret life you built on my family's money? For us. She gestured to the folder. It's all in there, Christopher. Every wire transfer, every gift, every hotel bill. They didn't just find the embezzlement from the trust. They found how you used it. You've been living a lie, and I've been funding it. Suddenly, the phone he'd placed on the table buzzed again, this time with a series of frantic notifications. He glanced down. Emails from his chief financial officer. Text messages from his bank. Urgent corporate accounts frozen. Credit card transaction denied. Amount $2,500. Merchant Cartier. Notice. Access to Kronos. Innovations. Primary operating accounts has been suspended pending an internal investigation. He looked up at Jessica, utter disbelief warring with dawning horror. "What did you do?" "I protected my assets," she said simply. The forensic report was presented to the board of the Hartman Foundation this morning. Given that the foundation holds a significant and until now silent partnership in Kronos Innovations, a little detail you must have missed in the fine print of the initial funding you stole, they voted to launch an immediate investigation into financial mismanagement. As the majority stakeholder, I had the authority to freeze the accounts to prevent further misappropriation of funds. Your CFO was notified 10 minutes ago. He had been checkmated in a game he never even knew he was playing. While he was racing his mistress to the hospital, his empire was being dismantled brick by the woman he had so fatally underestimated. "You can't do that," he said the words weak and powerless. "It's my company." "Is it?" she countered. "Is a house built with stolen materials truly owned by the thief? According to my lawyers, it's a very grey area. And Christopher," she added, her voice dropping, "my lawyers are much, much better than yours." As if summoned, another man approached the table. He was sharp and impeccably dressed, carrying a slim leather briefcase. This was David Chen, the Hartman family's lead counsel, a man known in legal circles as a shark who never lost. "Jessica," David said with a respectful nod, before turning his cool, assessing gaze on Christopher. "Mr. Davies." "David, thank you for coming," Jessica said. "I believe you have some documents for my husband." David Chen placed his briefcase on the table and opened it with 2 precise clicks. He pulled out a thick sheaf of papers and placed it squarely in front of Christopher on top of the accounting report. "Mr. Davies." The lawyer began, his tone formal and devoid of any emotion. "These are divorce papers. They cite infidelity and financial fraud as the primary grounds. All shared assets which, upon review, appear to have been purchased with funds originating from Mrs. Davies's inheritance or trusts have been frozen by court order. This includes your homes, your vehicles, and your personal investment portfolios." He slid another document forward. "This is a restraining order. You are to remain at least 500 feet away from Mrs. Davies and all her properties, including your marital home, effective immediately." Christopher's world narrowed to the stack of paper in front of him. Divorce, frozen assets, restraining order. Each word was a nail. "The marital home. You're kicking me out of my own house," he choked out. "The house was purchased by the Hartman Trust as a wedding gift for me, Christopher. Your name was never on the deed. You were a guest," Jessica said softly. "The party is over." He felt a surge of useless rage. "You'll regret this, Jessica. I'll fight you. I'll take you for everything you've got. I'll tell the world what you are." David Chen spoke before Jessica could. "I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Davies. Any attempt to slander Mrs. Davies would be met with a defamation lawsuit of a magnitude you can no longer afford to fight. Furthermore, we have not yet filed the criminal complaint for embezzlement. My client has been gracious enough to hold off on that for now. For the sake of her unborn child, she would prefer to handle this civilly. But if you choose to make this difficult—" He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Her graciousness has its limits, and a federal prosecutor would be very interested in this forensic report." Prison. The word wasn't spoken, but it echoed in the space between them. Christopher looked at Jessica, the mother of his child, and saw a stranger. A woman with the power to not only ruin him, but to utterly erase him. His bravado crumbled, replaced by a desperate, pathetic plea. "Jess, don't do this. Think of the baby." "I am thinking of him," she replied, her voice finally cracking with a sliver of raw emotion. "I am ensuring he is born into a life of honesty and integrity. I am protecting him from a father who is a liar, a cheat, and a thief. He will know his grandfather's legacy, not his father's shame." She stood up, her movement slow and deliberate. "Robert will show you out," she said, gesturing to Mr. Henderson, who had remained a silent statue nearby. "Your personal effects from the house will be sent to an address of your lawyer's choosing. Do not try to contact me again. All communication will go through David." She turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving Christopher sitting alone at the table with the ruins of his life laid out on paper. He was no longer Christopher Davies, the tech mogul. He was just a man in a hospital cafeteria, stripped of everything. Realizing he had not only lost a fortune, but he had lost a queen he never even knew he had. The walk out of the Hartman Medical Center was the longest walk of Christopher's life. Mr. Henderson shadowed him, a silent, immovable presence that ensured there would be no scenes, no outbursts. People in the lobby, the same people who would have once vied for his attention, now glanced at him with curiosity, their eyes lingering on his pale face and the formidable man escorting him. He was no longer a VIP. He was a problem being managed. When he reached the entrance, his Aston Martin was gone from its imperious spot in the fire lane. A valet, a different one from before, approached him, holding a single key. "Your vehicle has been moved to the long-term parking garage level P4, sir," the young man said politely. "The charges have been handled. Just like everything else." He snatched the key and stalked towards the parking garage, the humiliation burning in his gut. Inside the concrete structure, he found his car parked neatly between the lines, looking suddenly less like a symbol of power and more like a gaudy, useless toy. He slumped into the driver's seat, the smell of expensive leather now nauseating. He tried his phone. He called his CFO, Mark. It went straight to voicemail. He called the head of his legal department. Voicemail. He called his personal banker. A polite but firm assistant informed him that all his accounts were under a temporary hold, and she couldn't provide any more information. The wall was absolute. Jessica had built it, and it was impenetrable. He sat in the silence of his car for what felt like an hour, his mind a maelstrom of rage and disbelief. He had been so thoroughly and systematically dismantled. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of revenge. This was a long-planned, meticulously executed strategy. Jessica, his quiet, unassuming wife, had been watching him gathering evidence and laying the groundwork for his destruction for months. The affair hadn't been the cause. It had merely been the trigger. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold dread through him. She hadn't just reacted to his infidelity. She had been preparing for his betrayal on a fundamental level long before Brooke was ever in the picture. She had known what he was. His thoughts turned to Brooke. What was he going to do about her? He had brought her here promising to take care of her. Now he couldn't even afford to pay for her IV drip. He pulled up her contact, his thumb hovering over the call button. What would he even say? "Sorry, darling, the billionaire you've been seeing is a fraud whose wife just cut him off completely. Good luck with the dehydration." Before he could decide, a call came through. It was Brooke. "Chris, where are you?" Her voice was shaky, but the dramatic weakness was gone, replaced by an edge of anxiety. "They're discharging me." They handed me a bill. An actual bill. Can you believe it? They said I had to sort it out with admissions, and some huge guy in a suit told me I needed to leave the premises immediately. What is going on? Christopher closed his eyes. The small, manageable drama he had walked in with had been swallowed by a cataclysm. "I'm in the parking garage, Brooke. There's been a complication," he said, his voice flat. "A complication? What does that mean? Is this about that woman I saw you with? The pregnant one? Was that your wife?" The questions came in a rush, laced with accusation. She was no longer the damsel in distress. She was a co-conspirator whose getaway driver had just been arrested. "Yes, that was my wife." He admitted the words, feeling like gravel in his throat. "And what happened? Did she make a scene? Are you okay?" "She didn't make a scene, Brooke. She made a phone call," he said bitterly. "It turns out she owns the hospital and the bank that holds my company's accounts. And as of about an hour ago, she owns my entire life." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. He could almost hear the frantic calculations happening in her head as she processed this new world-altering information. What, you're kidding, right? This is some kind of sick joke." "I wish it were," he said, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical weight. "My accounts are frozen. The company is in lockdown. I've been served with divorce papers. I'm locked out of my own house." "Your house? But what about my things?" She asked the question so purely self-interested, it was almost comical. "I left my new Dior handbag in the foyer." Christopher almost laughed. A handbag. He was facing financial ruin, public disgrace, and possible jail time, and she was worried about a handbag. In that moment, he saw Brooke for exactly what she was, a beautiful, shallow opportunist who had attached herself to his wealth, just as Jessica had said. "I don't think you'll be getting it back, Brooke," he said wearily. "Listen, I can't do this right now. I have to figure things out." "Figure things out? What about me, Chris?" Her voice rose, becoming shrill. "You made me promises. You said you were leaving her. You said you were going to take care of me." "Promises I can no longer keep." He snapped, his patience gone. "The man you thought I was doesn't exist anymore. You're on your own." He hung up the phone before she could reply, tossing it onto the passenger seat. The silence that followed was absolute. He had no one to call, no one to help him. His business partners would scatter the moment the news of the fraud investigation broke. His friends were social climbers who would drop him the second his name was tainted. He was an island, and the tide was coming in. He finally started the car, the powerful engine roaring to life. But he had nowhere to go. He couldn't go home. He couldn't go to his office. He couldn't even check into a hotel, not with his credit cards frozen. He drove aimlessly out of the garage and into the late afternoon traffic. The city, his city, a place he had once commanded from penthouse boardrooms and exclusive clubs, now felt alien and hostile. Every gleaming skyscraper seemed to mock him, a testament to a world he was no longer a part of. He was a ghost haunting the streets of his former life. News alerts began to pop up on his car's display screen. Kronos Innovations halts trading pending internal review. CEO Christopher Davies under investigation for financial misconduct. The ripple effect was becoming a tidal wave. Jessica hadn't just exposed him. She had launched a surgical strike designed for maximum immediate impact. The business world moved at the speed of information, and his reputation was already being shredded. He pulled over to the side of a busy street, overwhelmed. He thought back to that morning. He had woken up a king. He had put on a $1,000 suit, drunk his custom-blended coffee, and looked at his reflection, seeing a master of the universe. Now he was nothing. A man with a fancy car, he probably wouldn't be able to afford gas for by next week. It was a fall so swift, so total, that his mind could barely grasp it. And the architect of it all was the one person he had never, not for a single second, considered a threat. The quiet woman carrying his child. Brooke Summers stood outside the imposing glass doors of the Hartman Medical Center, her thin silk blouse offering little protection against the sudden chill of the evening breeze. The bill from the emergency room was clutched in her hand, a crisp, mocking piece of paper detailing the exorbitant cost of IV fluids and a doctor's 5-minute consultation. Her phone was silent. Christopher hadn't answered her last 3 frantic calls. Her carefully constructed world, built on promises whispered over champagne and backed by the solid weight of Christopher's black card, was dissolving like sugar in the rain. She had seen herself as the heroine of a romance novel, the beautiful young woman who captures the heart of a powerful, trapped man and helps him escape his dreary, passionless marriage. She had imagined a future of sun-drenched villas, front-row seats at Fashion Week, and the envious glances of her peers. The woman she had seen in the lobby, Jessica, had shattered that fantasy. There was nothing dreary or passionless about her. Brooke had seen the steel in her eyes, the effortless authority in her posture. That wasn't the neglected wife from Christopher's stories. That was a queen surveying her domain. And Brooke, in her flimsy designer dress and feigned illness, had been nothing more than a court jester making a fool of herself. A taxi pulled up to the curb. She got in, giving the driver the address to the downtown penthouse Christopher had leased for their trysts. It was her only sanctuary, the only place filled with things he had bought her. Perhaps he would go there. Perhaps this was all a terrible, elaborate misunderstanding. But when the taxi arrived, her keycard flashed red. Access denied. She tried again. A cold knot of panic tightened in her stomach. She called the building's concierge, a man who had always greeted her with a fawning smile. "I'm sorry, Ms. Summers," he said, his voice now clipped and professional. "We received a notification from the leaseholder this afternoon. Your access has been revoked effective immediately." "But my things are up there," she protested, her voice rising. "My clothes, my jewelry. Arrangements will be made to have your personal belongings packed and sent to you. We will need a forwarding address," he said coolly. And then the line went dead. She was locked out, stripped of her access as cleanly and efficiently as Christopher had been. This wasn't just Jessica's anger. This was a scorched earth campaign. Defeated Brooke slumped against the cold marble wall of the building's exterior. The life she had been living for the past 6 months was an illusion. She hadn't been Christopher's partner. She had been a line item on an expense report, a luxury he had purchased with stolen funds. And now that the funds were gone, so was she. She thought about the other women in her circle, the ones who dated wealthy, powerful men. They had always warned her. "Get it in writing," they'd say. "Make sure you have your own account." She had laughed at them, convinced that her connection with Chris was different. It was real. He loved her. He was just waiting for the right time to leave his wife. How naive she had been. She had been so captivated by the performance of wealth and power that she never bothered to look behind the curtain. She had taken his stories about his simple wife at face value because it fit the narrative she wanted. She had been a willing audience for his lies. Her phone buzzed. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought it was Chris. But it was a notification from a gossip blog, the kind she followed religiously. The headline was a dagger. Tech CEO Christopher Davies' empire crumbles amidst allegations of massive fraud. Wife philanthropist Jessica Hartman files for divorce. The story was already out. It was brief but brutal. It mentioned Kronos Innovations' frozen accounts, the sudden investigation, and the divorce filing. It painted Christopher as a charlatan, and Jessica as a quiet powerhouse, the unsuspecting heiress to the Hartman fortune who had finally uncovered her husband's deceit. Brooke's name wasn't mentioned, but she knew it was only a matter of time. She was the loose thread in the story, the other woman. The paparazzi would find her. Her face would be splashed across tabloids, not as a rising star, but as a home-wrecking gold digger. The scandal would cling to her like tar poisoning any chance she had of a legitimate acting career. She hadn't just lost a benefactor. She had lost her future. A wave of bitter resentment washed over her. Resentment towards Christopher for his lies and his weakness. Resentment towards Jessica for her power and her perfectly executed revenge. But underneath it all, a small, hard kernel of resentment was reserved for herself. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Or in this case, she had been thrown out of it and locked out of the building. With no other options, she called the one person she knew she could always count on, the person she had been avoiding for months, because her life had seemed too small and too ordinary. Her sister. "Hey, Katie," she said, trying to keep her voice from breaking, when her sister answered. "Yeah, it's me. Listen, I know it's last minute, but can I come and stay with you for a few days? It's a long story." As she hailed another taxi this time to take her to a modest apartment in the suburbs, Brooke Summers finally understood. In the high-stakes game between Christopher and Jessica, she had never been a player. She was just part of the collateral damage. For the next 48 hours, Christopher Davies existed in a state of suspended animation. He found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city that still accepted cash, a relic of a bygone era. The room smelled of stale smoke and despair. He, a man who had once complained if his hotel suite didn't have a view of the park, now stared at a peeling wallpaper landscape of a faded beach. His phone was a relentless torrent of bad news. His story was the lead on every financial news network. Pundits who had once lauded him as a visionary now picked apart his career, recasting him as a reckless gambler and a fraud. Former colleagues and so-called friends released statements distancing themselves from him and Kronos Innovations. He was radioactive. He finally managed to get a lawyer on the phone, a harried public defender his old legal team had recommended in a terse 2-sentence email. The man, an overworked but decent lawyer named Ben Carter, laid out the grim reality. "The evidence the Hartman legal team has is overwhelming, Mr. Davies," Ben said, his voice tinny over the phone. "The paper trail for the embezzlement is pristine. They have you dead to rights on the civil fraud. Your only saving grace right now is that Mrs. Davies hasn't pressed criminal charges. My advice, don't provoke her. So I just roll over. Let her take everything," Christopher demanded, pacing the threadbare carpet of his motel room. "Frankly, sir, there's nothing left to take. It was never yours to begin with," Ben stated bluntly. "The company was built with her money. The house is hers. The cars were purchased from accounts funded by her trust. We can fight to get you some personal effects, maybe a severance from the company you technically founded, but it will be pennies on the dollar. They are in a position of absolute strength." Absolute strength. The phrase echoed in his mind. He thought of Jessica, of her calm, unyielding face in the cafeteria. He had mistaken her gentleness for weakness, her kindness for naivete. He now understood that her gentleness was a choice, a luxury afforded to her by a foundation of unshakable power. He had been the weak one all along, propped up by her resources, blinded by his own ego. On the third day, a courier delivered a box to his motel room. It contained a few of his old suits, some books, and a small framed photo from the early days of their marriage. In the photo, he and Jessica were laughing on a beach, young and full of hope. He looked at the man in the picture, the man with the genuine smile, and felt like he was looking at a complete stranger. When had he lost that person? When had the ambition curdled into greed? The confidence into arrogance? Tucked inside the box was a simple, handwritten note on plain stationery. Christopher. This is the last time you will hear from me directly. Enclosed are the final divorce papers. Sign them. If you sign them without a fight, the criminal charges will not be pursued. You will be left with the small personal savings account you had before we were married, which amounts to roughly $70,000. That is all. Consider it a final act of mercy, not for you, but for the child who will one day have to know you are his father. Do not try to see the baby after he is born. David will arrange supervised visitation in a neutral location when and if I deem it appropriate. This is not negotiable. Jessica. $70,000. To the man he had been a week ago, it was a bar tab. Now it was his entire world. The note was not cruel. It was clinical. It was the final closing of a deal, the termination of a bad investment. She had excised him from her life with the precision of a surgeon. He sat on the lumpy bed, the divorce papers in his hand, and he finally, truly understood. This wasn't about the affair. The affair was just the final ugly symptom of his betrayal. He had betrayed her trust, her family's legacy, and the very foundation of their marriage. He had taken her quiet, steadfast love and used it as a cover for his own insecurities and greed. There was no fight left in him. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching emptiness. He had built his life into a magnificent tower, but he had done it on sand. And the tide had come in. He picked up the cheap pen from the motel desk, its plastic casing feeling flimsy and foreign in his hand. He flattened the papers on the stained nightstand, and with a trembling hand signed his name. He signed away his company, his home, his fortune, and his family. He signed away Christopher Davies, the tech mogul. When he was done, all that was left was Chris. A man in a cheap motel room with $70,000 and a lifetime of regret stretching out before him. The stripping of the king was complete. He was left with nothing but himself, and it was a self he no longer recognized. 6 months later, Jessica Hartman stood at her office window, her infant son Robert sleeping peacefully in a bassinet nearby. The world outside was painted in the crisp colors of autumn, a season of change that mirrored her own. She was no longer the wife of a CEO. She was the formidable chairman of the Hartman Foundation, a leader in her own right. The scandal had settled. Kronos Innovations. The hollow monument to Christopher's ego was absorbed and rebranded. As Hartman Future Technologies, it was now a powerful arm of the foundation, its purpose redirected from flashy apps to meaningful medical innovation. The empire built on a lie had been remade into a legacy of substance. News of Christopher was a whisper. He had taken the pittance she had left him and disappeared into a life of anonymity in a small Midwestern town. He signed the divorce papers without a fight, and out of shame or cowardice, had not once asked to see his son. He was a ghost erased from the life he had tried to corrupt. Dr. Ann Peterson knocked gently before entering, her eyes warm. "The new pediatric wing is officially opening next week," she said with a smile. The dedication plaque looks wonderful. Jessica looked from her friend to her son, a profound sense of peace settling over her. She had faced betrayal and had not just endured. She had built something better from the ruins. She had protected her family, her child, and her legacy. The storm was over, and in the quiet aftermath, Jessica Hartman, mother and leader, was finally truly home. What a story of deceit, hidden power, and ultimate justice. Jessica's journey shows us that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet, observant force that changes the world. Christopher's spectacular downfall is a powerful reminder that a life built on lies is a house of cards ready to collapse at the slightest breeze. He didn't just lose his money, he lost the one person who was his greatest asset, and he never even knew it. What do you think about Jessica's actions? Was her response perfectly calculated justice, or was it a cold, brutal revenge? Could Christopher ever redeem himself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of hidden strength and shocking revelations, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a good story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for listening.
Sometimes fate does not offer choices, it corners you. The Stoics believed that when one can no longer control what happens, the only power left is how we respond. And so, when the moment of no return arrived, Alara didn't fight. It wasn't bravery or surrender, it was survival. The hastily concluded ceremony was a blur, a strange, disjointed dream from which Alara couldn't seem to wake. One moment she was the radiant bride, moments from her fairy tale ending. The next, a pawn in a stranger's game, uttering vows to a man whose eyes held galaxies of secrets. Damien Thorne, her husband. The name felt alien on her tongue, a bitter pill swallowed in the chaos. What had she done? What choice did she truly have? The alternative, public ruin, the whispers and stares, the utter desolation of being so thoroughly discarded, was a precipice she couldn't face. So she'd nodded, a barely perceptible movement that had sealed an unimaginable fate. Now, the iron gates of Shadowfen Manor clanged shut behind the sleek black car that had spirited her away from the Celestial Grand Hotel. Each resounding clang felt like a bar dropping into place, a premonition of her new life, her gilded cage. But it wasn't just the cold, formidable grandeur of the sprawling estate that chilled Alara to the bone. It was the oppressive silence, a quiet so profound it seemed to swallow sound, heavy with unspoken Thorne family secrets. And then there was the unnerving discovery she would soon make, a discovery that would whisper of darker currents beneath the polished veneer of the Thorne dynasty. Shadowfen Manor loomed before her, a Gothic masterpiece of dark stone and sprawling ivy, its many windows like vacant eyes staring out over meticulously manicured yet eerily still grounds. Opulent, yes, vast, undoubtedly, but welcoming? Not in the slightest. It felt like a mausoleum, a monument to wealth and power, not a home. Damien, her new, enigmatic husband, was as distant and formal as the house itself. He led her through echoing halls, his footsteps unnervingly silent on the marble floors, to a guest suite that was larger than her entire Viridia City apartment. Luxurious, certainly, with priceless antiques and silks that shimmered in the dim light, but it felt utterly isolated, a beautifully appointed prison cell. "This is yours," he stated, his voice devoid of inflection, his gaze sweeping the room as if cataloging its contents rather than acknowledging her presence. "We will discuss arrangements later." Arrangements? What did that even mean? Were they talking about their marriage? Or her role in this elaborate charade? But he offered no further explanation, turning on his heel and leaving her alone with the suffocating silence and 1,000 unanswered questions. How could a place so grand feel so empty? Days bled into a monotonous routine. Alara explored Shadowfen Manor cautiously, always feeling like an intruder, a ghost haunting its hallowed halls. She soon noticed a particular wing of the manor, tucked away at the end of a long, shadowed corridor that seemed strangely off-limits. A heavy, ornate door, carved with an intricate design she couldn't quite decipher, was always locked. No staff ever seemed to venture near it. When she'd casually inquired about it with a passing maid, the young woman had paled, muttered something about it being Mr. Damien's private area, and scurried away. The locked wing became a focal point for Alara's unease, a tangible symbol of the secrets this house, this family, seemed determined to keep. What was hidden behind that door? Her first family dinner was an exercise in thinly veiled hostility. Isolde Thorne, Damien's mother and the glacial matriarch of the Thorne Empire, presided over the long, polished mahogany table like a queen holding court. Her silver-gray eyes, so like Damien's, yet entirely without his occasional flicker of unreadable emotion, raked over Alara with an expression of undisguised contempt. "Some women," Isolde had remarked, her voice a silken rasp as she addressed no one in particular, yet everyone at the table, are remarkably adept at landing on their feet, regardless of the circumstances. A curious talent. The barb was clearly aimed at Alara. Damien, seated at the head of the table, remained impassive, his face a mask of aristocratic indifference, though Alara thought she saw a muscle tighten in his jaw. Did he ever show what he was truly feeling? The tension was a constant, simmering beneath the surface of every interaction, every shared space. Alara often overheard hushed, tense arguments drifting from behind the closed doors of Damien's study, snippets of conversations between him and Isolde, revolving around the hasty marriage, the corporate image of Thorne Global Enterprises, and the potential fallout. Alara felt utterly alone, a pariah in this fortress of wealth. She tried calling her best friend, Zara Kazmi, her lifeline to the outside world, to sanity, but the calls felt stilted, the connection strained by the invisible walls of Shadowfen. How could she explain the oppressive atmosphere, the undercurrents of something wrong? And yet, amidst the coldness and isolation, Damien began to make small, almost imperceptible gestures that pricked at Alara's confusion. One morning, a rare, leather-bound art book on early 20th century photography appeared on the console table in her suite. Another day, a small tin of her favorite, rather obscure chamomile and lavender tea was placed beside her teacup at breakfast. No note, no explanation, just these quiet acknowledgments of her. These flickers of thoughtfulness, so at odds with his otherwise cold, formal demeanor, were deeply unsettling. Was this kindness, or another calculated move in a game she didn't understand? It made Damien even more of an enigma, a complex puzzle she couldn't begin to solve. One particularly bleak evening, restlessness drove Alara from her suite. She found Damien in the vast, two-story library, a silhouette against the roaring fire in the enormous stone hearth. He was staring into the flames, a glass of amber liquid cradled in his hand, looking less like the powerful CEO and more like a man burdened by the weight of the world. He didn't startle as she approached, as if he'd sensed her presence. "This family," he began, his voice low, roughened by something she couldn't name. "We are not what we seem, Alara." He turned slowly, his gray eyes, usually so unreadable, now reflecting the firelight, holding a depth of weariness that surprised her. "Marcus was always a fool," he continued, a raw edge to his tone. "A charming, reckless fool. But this marriage, it was to protect the Thorne name." Alara's heart thudded. "Protect it from what?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The air crackled with unspoken things. "And what about me, Damien? Where do I fit into this protection?" He took a step closer, the scent of old books and expensive whiskey clinging to him. His eyes, those intense, unreadable eyes, locked onto hers. "You, Alara," he said, his voice a soft, dangerous murmur, "are now part of the protection." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Protection from what? Or was she merely a pawn, a beautiful, well-kept piece in a game far larger and more sinister than she could ever imagine? The strange, recurring motif she'd begun to notice throughout the manor. A stylized black orchid, subtly woven into tapestries, carved into furniture, even embossed on the spine of the photography book he'd given her, suddenly felt less like a design choice and more like a symbol, a silent, watching presence. What did it signify? And what secrets did it guard within the cold stone walls of Shadowfen Manor? The question of protection haunted her, a chilling echo in the vast emptiness of her new life. The heavy question of Damien's motives, the chilling implication that she was merely part of the protection, settled over Alara like the ever-present gloom of Shadowfen Manor. Days turned into weeks, each one a slow crawl through a labyrinth of gilded cages and unspoken Thorn family secrets. She felt it, didn't she? This gnawing unease, the sense that every corner of the estate, every polite smile from the staff, every glance from Isolde Thorn concealed a hidden meaning. She was determined not to be a passive victim in this opulent drama. Alara began to subtly investigate the Thorns, her photographer's eye for detail now focused on deciphering the clues scattered around her. The black orchid motif became an obsession. It was everywhere, from the antique wallpaper in a disused drawing room to the intricate carving on an old family portrait in the Grand Gallery. The portrait depicted a woman with haunting eyes and an unsmiling mouth, a single black orchid pinned to her dark gown. Who was she? And why did the sight of her send a shiver down Alara's spine? One late afternoon, drawn by an irresistible pull, Alara found herself once again standing before the imposing library door. A hushed conversation, sharp and venomous, seeped through the heavy oak. It was Isolde and Damien. A slipped confession was about to shatter Alara's already fractured world yet again. The truth about Marcus, a secret lover, the real, cynical reason for her almost marriage. It was all about to come crashing down, but could Damien's unexpected defense of her ignite a spark of defiance? You have to wonder, don't you, what twists fate still had in store. She was a nobody, Damien. Isolde's voice was a low hiss, cold and sharp as shattered ice. A placeholder for Marcus until he tired of his indiscretions. This ridiculous marriage is a farce, a desperate attempt to protect Thorn Global after his latest, and might I add, most public scandal. Alara pressed her ear closer, her breath catching in her throat. Placeholder? Indiscretions? Then came Damien's voice, equally low, but edged with a cold fury that made the hairs on Alara's arms stand on end. Alara is not a placeholder, Mother. Marcus was weak. He had a mistress for years. He had gambling debts the size of a small European nation. He never intended to marry Alara, or anyone for that matter. You pressured him for the merger with Sterling Consolidated, and you know it. Alara was simply the most suitable candidate to present a facade of stability. A corporate pawn. The word slammed into Alara with the force of a physical blow. Her love for Marcus, the future she'd envisioned, all a lie, a carefully constructed illusion to facilitate a business deal. The heartbreak was a fresh, agonizing wound, quickly followed by a burning tide of anger. How could they be so callous, so manipulative? Damien continued, his voice dropping further, almost to a growl. She deserves better than Marcus could ever offer. Far better. I married her to shield her from the inevitable fallout of his implosion, not to trap her entirely in our complexities. Shield her? Or imprison her further? The distinction felt terrifyingly blurry. Later that evening, the weight of the overheard conversation pressing down on her, Alara confronted Damien in his study. The room, like the rest of the manor, was impeccably furnished, dominated by a massive mahogany desk and shelves groaning with leather-bound volumes. He didn't look up as she entered, his attention fixed on a complex financial report spread before him. Was any of it real? Alara's voice trembled, but she forced herself to meet his gaze when he finally lifted his head. The photography books? The tea? Or was that just part of the shielding? A flicker of something unreadable crossed Damien's face. Regret? Or was it just irritation at being disturbed? My initial motive, he began, his tone measured, was indeed damage control for Thorn Global Enterprises. Marcus's irresponsibility threatened to unravel years of work. He paused, his gray eyes studying her intently. However, my perception of you, Alara, is evolving. He actually sounded sincere. You are resilient. Far more than anyone in this family, myself included, initially gave you credit for. Resilient. Was that all she was to him? A surprisingly durable pawn? The media storm predictably erupted with renewed ferocity. Jilted bride marries billionaire brother, gold digger or hapless victim, screamed one headline. The Thorn Triangle, love lies and corporate intrigue, blared another. Paparazzi became a constant, unwelcome presence at the gates of Shadowfen Manor. Alara felt exposed, dissected under the harsh glare of public opinion, her life turned into a sordid soap opera for mass consumption. The whispers followed her even within the supposed sanctuary of the manor. The staff's previously deferential glances now tinged with curiosity and, she suspected, pity. It was almost unbearable. What right did the world have to judge her, to pick apart her pain? Her only true lifeline was Zara Kazmi, her fiercely loyal friend called daily, her voice a welcome anchor of sanity in Alara's swirling vortex of confusion and despair. During one such call, Zara shared some unsettling intel. "Listen, Alara," Zara said, her voice low and urgent. "There are some persistent rumors circulating about Thorn Global's finances. Whispers that things are much shakier than they appear on the surface. And get this, someone's been feeding me anonymous tips about your new family. Highly specific, very damaging stuff. I don't know who it is yet, but they seem to have an axe to grind with the Thorns." An anonymous tipper? Another layer of intrigue in the already convoluted Thorn saga. Who could it be? And what did they want? The questions swirled in Alara's mind, adding to her growing sense of dread. Trapped in the gilded cage of Shadowfen, suffocating under the weight of secrets and scandal, Alara knew she needed an escape, a purpose. She couldn't let the Thorns or the voracious media define her. Photography had always been her solace, her way of making sense of the world. And so, an idea began to take root. She would use her skills, her passion, to create something positive, something real, something entirely her own. She decided to start a free photography workshop for underprivileged youth in a struggling Viridia City neighborhood, a world away from the opulent emptiness of Shadowfen. It would be a place where creativity could flourish, where young voices could find expression, a place where she could perhaps find herself again, beyond the tarnished identity of Mrs. Damien Thorn. From afar, Damien observed her burgeoning project. He made no comment, offered no overt support, yet Alara occasionally found new, high-quality cameras and art supplies discreetly delivered to the community center. No note, no explanation. Just his silent, enigmatic presence, a flicker of what might have been admiration in his usually guarded eyes. Was this another calculated move? Or was it possible that the cold, calculating CEO of Thorn Global Enterprises was capable of kindness? The thought was as terrifying as it was tantalizing. She was forging a new path, but the shadows of the Thorns and the ever-present Black Orchid were never far behind. And the question still lingered. What would happen when her newfound purpose collided with the secrets Damien was still so fiercely protecting? The ground beneath her feet felt dangerously unstable. One wrong step, and she feared she might fall into an abyss from which there would be no return. The truth, she suspected, was a far more dangerous game than she had ever imagined. And she was right in the middle of it. Don't you just wonder what she'll uncover next? Just as a sliver of peace, a fragile sense of purpose, began to emerge from the wreckage of Alara's life. The past always has a way of returning, doesn't it? Her newfound sanctuary, the photography workshop buzzing with the children's laughter and creativity, was about to be violently challenged. One bright Saturday morning, the Viridia City sun streaming through the grimy windows of the community center, Alara was helping a young girl named Maya adjust the focus on an old donated camera. The room was alive, a vibrant chaos of excited chatter and clicking shutters. Suddenly, the door burst open with a force that rattled the window panes. Silence descended like a suffocating blanket. Every child froze, their innocent eyes wide with alarm. Standing silhouetted in the doorway was Marcus Thorn. His handsome face, once the object of Alara's adoration, was now a twisted mask of fury and bitter entitlement. Can you even imagine the audacity to show up there in her space? Marcus Thorn's venomous return ignited a fresh hellfire of scandal, a media storm more vicious than before. But this time, Damien Thorn wouldn't just watch from the shadows of Shadowfen Manor. Oh no. His explosive public defense of Alara at the Thorn Global headquarters wasn't just a declaration of war against his own blood, his own brother. It was a confession, a revelation so stunning it would leave the entirety of Viridia City gasping for breath. And you won't want to miss a single, electrifying detail of what happens next. Marcus stalked into the room, his expensive shoes crunching on the worn linoleum floor. His gaze, cold and hard as chips of ice, swept dismissively over the children before locking onto Alara. So, this is where the little gold digger hides when she's not scheming her way into my family's fortune, he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Several of the older children gasped, instinctively moving to shield the younger ones. Alara's heart tightened, a familiar ache of betrayal mixed with a new, surprising surge of protective anger. She stepped forward, placing herself between Marcus and the children. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the tremor that ran through her. This was her place, her sanctuary. He had no right. "I'm here to set the record straight," he spat, taking another menacing step. "You think you've won, don't you? Marrying my brother? You manipulated him. You planned this all along, you conniving little nobody." "You're wrong, Marcus," Alara said firmly, her chin held high. The resilience Damien had spoken of, she felt it now, a steel rod in her spine. "I never used you. I never manipulated Damien. You made your choices. You abandoned me. I'm building something real here, something you wouldn't understand, and I won't let your bitterness ruin it." His laugh was harsh, devoid of humor. "Oh, people will believe me, darling. Who do you think they'll trust? A nobody from the slums, or a thorn?" He gestured around the humble community center with a look of profound disgust. The air crackled with tension. Some of the children clutched their cameras like shields, but Alara didn't back down. "I'm here for these kids, Marcus," she stated, her voice ringing with conviction. "And I won't let your poison touch them. Now, please leave." Of course, lurking paparazzi, like vultures sensing a fresh kill, had followed Marcus. The confrontation, every ugly word, every flash of raw emotion, was captured, disseminated, and sensationalized within hours. New headlines screamed across the digital landscape: Thorne brothers at war over scheming bride, and bitter ex accuses Alara Thorne of master manipulation. The online trolls, emboldened by Marcus's accusations, launched a fresh wave of relentless attacks, questioning Alara's character, her motives, her very existence. The carefully constructed piece she had begun to build around her photography workshop crumbled. Some parents, frightened by the negative attention and the Thorne family drama, pulled their children from the program. The sting of public judgment, the weight of whispers and sideways glances, it was a heavy burden. Alara was devastated, but a core of defiance burned within her. She wouldn't give up. Not on the kids, not on herself. Damien witnessed the toll it was taking on her. He saw the shadows under her eyes, the forced brightness of her smile. And something within him, something he'd kept locked away for years, finally snapped. Without consulting Isolde, without a word to his board of directors, he called an emergency press conference at the gleaming, imposing headquarters of Thorne Global Enterprises. The room was packed, a feeding frenzy of reporters and cameras, all eager for the next sordid chapter in the Thorne saga. What would the stoic CEO say? Would he denounce his wife? Defend his brother? Damien Thorne stepped up to the podium, his bespoke suit immaculate, his expression calm but resolute, a glint of steel in his gray eyes. Viridia City held its breath. "I am here today," Damien began, his voice amplified by the microphones cutting through the expectant hush, "to address the false and frankly pathetic accusations made against my wife, Alara Vance Thorne." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "My brother, Marcus Thorne, has painted a picture of her that is a grotesque distortion of the truth. His claims are lies, born from his own profound bitterness, his own failures, and his own staggering selfishness." A collective gasp rippled through the room. This was unprecedented. Family loyalty was paramount in the Thorne dynasty. "Alara is not a schemer," Damien continued, his voice gaining strength, resonating with an undeniable conviction. "She is a woman of profound integrity, remarkable strength, and a heart I am only beginning to comprehend. I married her because she deserved protection from my brother's recklessness, from the consequences of his actions, and I married her because—" He paused, and for a moment the unflappable Damien Thorne looked almost vulnerable. "Because I have come to admire her deeply, more than I can say." The room erupted in murmurs. This was more than a defense, it was a public declaration. He then proceeded, with cold, irrefutable precision, to reveal documented evidence of Marcus's long-term affair, his mountains of gambling debts, exposing the full, sordid extent of his younger brother's deceit. "The only schemer in this equation," Damien concluded, his voice like ice, "is Marcus. Isolde Thorne, seated in the front row, a silent, regal figure of disapproval, was visibly shaken. Her face remained an icy mask, but the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her perfectly manicured hand betrayed her shock, her fury at Damien's public defiance, his shattering of the carefully constructed Thorne facade. The family loyalty was broken. The battle lines were drawn. Later, in the quiet antechamber backstage, away from the flashing cameras and clamoring reporters, Damien found Alara. She was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and an emotion he couldn't quite decipher. "I meant what I said, Alara," he said softly, his voice for her ears alone. "All of it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unassuming black velvet box. Not a lavish diamond, not the ostentatious jewels favored by Thorne women. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a simple, antique silver ring, intricately engraved with a tiny, detailed black orchid. This belonged to someone who understood what it meant to be an outsider in this family, Damien said, his voice husky. "She was resilient, like you." He met her gaze, and for the first time, Alara saw not the enigmatic CEO but the man. The black orchid, for her, symbolized that resilience, a quiet defiance. Perhaps it can symbolize a new beginning for us." Alara was stunned into silence. His vulnerability, the unexpected tenderness in his voice, the profound significance of the black orchid meaning now laid bare. It was overwhelming. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked from the ring to his searching face. A new beginning? Could it be possible? Could this silver ring, this emblem of a shared understanding, truly be the key to unlocking a future she hadn't dared to imagine? The battle was far from over, she knew. Isolde's silent fury was a storm gathering on the horizon, but for the first time since that disastrous wedding day, Alara felt a flicker, not just of hope, but of something far more powerful. Connection. Tears welled in Alara's eyes as she stared at the simple silver ring, the intricately engraved black orchid, a stark contrast to the ostentatious jewels favored by the Thorne women. The battle Damien had waged in that press conference, the public declaration of support, it was overwhelming. The black orchid, once a chilling symbol of Shadowfen Manor's cold secrets and her own unease, now felt like a fragile bud of hope, a testament to shared resilience. "A new beginning," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, as she looked up at Damien, truly seeing him, perhaps for the very first time, not as the enigmatic CEO or the brother of her betrayer, but as a man marked by his own scars. A man offering a tentative hand across a chasm of mistrust. But could they truly escape the suffocating weight of the Thorne legacy, the relentless glare of Viridia City's insatiable appetite for scandal? Could this fragile connection withstand the storms yet to come? He just knew this wasn't over, right? The Thornes didn't just fade into the background. And indeed, their public victory at the press conference was a powerful blow. But the war for their future, for their sanity, was far from over. Isolde Thorne, publicly undermined by her own son, was not a woman to accept defeat gracefully. Her silent fury, witnessed by Alara in the subtle clench of her jaw and the icy glitter in her eyes during the press conference, was a storm-gathering force on the horizon. A few days later, the summons came. Not a polite request, but a command delivered on heavy cream cardstock embossed with the Thorne family crest. Isolde Thorne requested Alara's presence in the West Drawing Room. The West Drawing Room. Chills ran down Alara's spine. It was adjacent to the mysterious locked wing. Isolde Thorne, cornered and radiating a furious, dangerous energy, finally revealed the dark, tragic secret behind that locked wing of Shadowfen Manor. It was a story more chilling than Alara could have imagined. A narrative deeply intertwined with the haunting motif of the Black Orchid and the family's ruthless, unyielding ambition. This gut-wrenching revelation would force Alara and Damien to confront the true, terrible cost of being a Thorne. And it would test their fragile, burgeoning bond to its absolute limit. Would they find the strength to exchange vows that were truly their own, or would the family's darkest truths finally shatter them? The air in the drawing room was thick with unspoken menace. "You've caused quite the disruption, Alara," Isolde began, her voice deceptively soft, yet laced with steel. She gestured towards the infamous locked door at the far end of the room. "I believe it's time you understood the true nature of the family you've so forcefully inserted yourself into." To Alara's astonishment, Isolde produced an antique key, and with a click that echoed in the oppressive silence, unlocked the heavy, ornate door. What lay beyond was a revelation that would change everything. The room was an artist's studio, frozen in time. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light filtering through a grimy, arched window. Canvases, some blank, others covered in vibrant, melancholic paintings, leaned against the walls. And everywhere, were black orchids, depicted in various states of bloom and decay, their dark, velvety petals rendered with an almost painful intensity. The air was thick with the scent of old turpentine and something else, sorrow. "This," Isolde said, her voice devoid of emotion, "belonged to my sister-in-law, Lyra Thorne, Damien's aunt." She paused, her gaze fixed on a haunting self-portrait of a woman with eyes that mirrored Damien's in their depth, but held an unbearable sadness. Lyra was an artist, a true talent, but she had the misfortune of falling in love with a man deemed beneath her by my late husband. She defied him. She married for love. Isolde's lip curled. "The Thorns protect their own, Alara, vehemently, and they destroy those who threaten the legacy or who dare to defy the established order. Lyra met a tragic, mysterious end, an accident, they called it. Her spirit, her defiance, was too much for this family to bear. The black orchid was her mark, her signature, a symbol of her untamed spirit and her profound sorrow." Isolde turned then, her eyes pinning Alara with a chilling warning. "Damien may believe he feels something for you now. He may even believe he can protect you. But this family, Alara, it consumes everything in its path. Every light, every hope. Do you understand?" Alara was shaken to her core. The tragic family story, the weight of Lyra's fate, Isolde's undisguised threat, it was a brutal, visceral confirmation of her deepest fears. The locked-wing mystery was solved, but the resolution offered no comfort, only a deeper understanding of the darkness that lurked beneath the Thorne family's glittering facade. But Isolde had misjudged her. The revelation didn't break Alara, it solidified her resolve. She found Damien later that day, staring out over the bleak, windswept gardens of Shadowfen. She told him about the meeting, about Lyra's studio, about Isolde's chilling words. Damien listened in silence, his face unreadable. When she finished, he turned to her, and the mask he usually wore seemed to crack. "Lyra, she was my confidante," he confessed, his voice raw with a pain that was clearly decades old. "She understood the gilded cage of this family. Her fate, it made me cynical about love, about family, about everything. I swore I would never become like them, like my father, like Isolde." He looked at Alara then, a desperate vulnerability in his eyes. "I never wanted them to break me, or anyone else." This shared vulnerability, this glimpse into his own wounded past, brought them closer than ever before. The carefully constructed walls between them began to crumble. In that moment of shared pain and understanding, a new path forward began to emerge. They decided then and there to have a second wedding ceremony. Not for Viridia City's gossip columns, not for the Thorne corporate image, but for themselves. A quiet, intensely private ceremony in the neglected, overgrown south gardens of Shadowfen Manor, a forgotten corner of the estate that Alara had recently begun to tend, coaxing new life from the dormant soil. Only Zara, her ever-faithful friend, was there. And surprisingly, a handful of the children from Alara's photography workshop, their bright, innocent faces a stark contrast to the somber history of Shadowfen. Damien stood waiting for her, not in a stiff tuxedo, but in a simple linen shirt, the usual sharpness of his features softened by the dappled sunlight filtering through the ancient trees. As Alara approached, wearing a simple white dress she'd found tucked away in a vintage shop, the black orchid ring gleaming on her finger, their eyes met. And in that gaze, years of pain, misunderstanding, and cautious hope seemed to coalesce. They exchanged heartfelt vows, simple words promising honesty, partnership, and a commitment to face the future, whatever it may hold, together. It wasn't a grand declaration, but a quiet, genuine moment of love and commitment, a healing balm on old wounds. As they spoke their vows, Alara noticed a single, perfect black orchid, a robe bloom amidst the wildflowers she'd planted, unfurling its velvety petals in the sunlight. A symbol, perhaps, not of sorrow, but of their shared journey towards a new, resilient love. This was their real wedding, the true beginning of their story. But even as this fragile peace settled around them, a frantic call from Zara shattered the quiet. Alara, Damien. The anonymous tipper, I think I know who it is. And believe me, it changes everything about Thorn Global's supposed stability, and it might just bring the whole damn empire crashing down. The news hung in the air, a chilling reminder that the outside world and the intricate, venomous machinations of the Thorn family were ever present, lurking just beyond the fragile sanctuary of their garden vows. One last secret remained, and it was about to explode with the force of a well-placed bomb. What could it be? And could their newfound partnership withstand this final, devastating revelation? The fragile peace Alara and Damien had found in the sun-dappled gardens of Shadowfen Manor, amidst their quiet vows and the unexpected bloom of a single black orchid, was destined to be short-lived. After all, this was the Thorn dynasty, wasn't it? A family whose secrets had secrets. Zara's frantic call. Alara, Damien, the anonymous tipper. I think I know who it is, and believe me, it changes everything about Thorn Global's supposed stability, and it might just bring the whole damn empire crashing down. Had cast an immediate, chilling shadow over their newfound serenity. One last, devastating secret remained, and it was about to explode with the force of a meticulously placed bomb, threatening to obliterate not just Thorn Global, but the very foundations of their new beginning. Could their love, forged in fire and scandal, withstand this final, cataclysmic test? Or would the Thorn legacy ultimately consume them both? You have to be on the edge of your seat, wondering what's coming, right? The final Thorn secret, when it finally detonated, was more shocking, more insidious than Alara could have ever conceived. It implicated not just Marcus, not just the desperate measures taken to cover his recklessness, but an unexpected and far more powerful family member. The anonymous tipper, Zara revealed with a grim satisfaction that even Alara could appreciate, was a disgruntled former Thorn Global chief financial officer. He hadn't been working alone. Oh no. He'd partnered with a lesser-known, oft-overlooked Thorn cousin, a quiet, resentful man whom Marcus had spectacularly double-crossed in a previous business venture, leaving him financially ruined and hungry for revenge. Their combined motive? To expose Isolde Thorn's long-hidden, deeply illegal financial manipulations. For years, it turned out, Isolde had been systematically cooking the books, artificially inflating Thorn Global's value, all to cover Marcus's ever-escalating gambling debts and disastrous business decisions. The merger Damien had mentioned, the one Alara was supposed to be a pawn in, it was a desperate bid by Isolde to absorb a healthier company and mask the rot within Thorn Global. The depth of the deceit was staggering. The revelation, when Zara's meticulously researched exposé hit the Viridia City Chronicle's front page, caused an immediate and catastrophic corporate crisis. Thorn Global's stock plummeted. Federal investigators swarmed the headquarters. Isolde Thorn, the Ice Queen, the untouchable matriarch, was directly implicated in massive fraud and insider trading. Marcus, already disgraced, found himself facing a fresh wave of legal troubles that threatened to bury him for good. The Thorn Empire, built on generations of ruthless ambition and carefully guarded secrets, was on the verge of complete and utter collapse. Could anything survive this? This crisis became the ultimate test of Alara and Damien's love, their partnership, and their courage. They were no longer just navigating personal scandal. They were at the epicenter of a corporate earthquake threatening to swallow them whole. But for Alara and Damien, now truly united by shared trauma, shared vulnerability, and a love that had been unexpectedly forged in the crucible of adversity, this was also their chance. Their chance to redefine the tarnished Thorn legacy, to prove that their story was more than just another sordid headline. It was a testament to resilience, to the search for truth, and to a love that refused to be extinguished. Damien, with Alara unexpectedly, yet resolutely by his side, faced the board of Thorn Global. He faced the furious stockholders, he faced the relentless media, and he didn't hide, he didn't dissemble. He laid bare the truth, the full, ugly extent of his family's corruption. It was a brutal, painful confession, but it was honest. Then he proposed something truly radical, a complete and transparent restructuring of Thorn Global. He pledged to cooperate fully with investigators to implement sweeping ethical reforms, even if it meant significant initial losses, even if it meant dismantling parts of the empire his ancestors had built. It was a gamble that could mean the end of everything, or just maybe, a new beginning. Alara, meanwhile, found her own way to fight back, to reclaim the narrative. She used her photography, her art, not to sensationalize, but to humanize. Her powerful, poignant images documented the real people affected by Thorn Global's corporate greed, the employees facing uncertainty, the small investors who had lost their savings. But she also captured images of hope, of resilience, of the potential for positive change within the Viridia City community that the Thorns had for so long callously disregarded. Her work, initially met with cynicism, slowly began to shift public perception, offering a narrative beyond the scandal, a glimpse of a different kind of future. Months passed. Months of grueling legal battles, of painful restructuring, of relentless public scrutiny. But slowly, painstakingly, things began to change. Thorn Global, though smaller, emerged from the wreckage more stable, more respected, its foundations rebuilt on a bedrock of truth and transparency. Isolde Thorn, her power diminished, her reputation in tatters, retreated from public life, a recluse in a far-flung corner of Shadowfen Manor. Marcus, stripped of his wealth and status, was finally facing the legal consequences of his actions. His downfall was complete. A cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms and back alleys of Viridia City. And what of Alara and Damien? Their community impact was undeniable. Alara's photography workshop thrived, a vibrant hub of creativity and hope in a neighborhood long overlooked. She was already making plans to open a small gallery, a space dedicated to showcasing local artists, to giving voice to the voiceless. Shadowfen Manor, once a symbol of her gilded cage, began to transform. The oppressive silence was gradually replaced by the sounds of life. The laughter of the workshop children during occasional weekend visits, the lively discussions as Alara and Damien planned community events, the soft murmur of their own shared dreams. The black orchid motif, once so ominous, now seemed to carry a different symbolism. Resilience, yes, but also the beauty that can emerge from darkness, the strength found in embracing even the most painful truths. They were no longer seen as Viridia City's most scandalous couple, but as true partners. A team who had faced unimaginable adversity and had chosen integrity, chosen each other, over the easy path of denial and deceit. The final scene of their public drama wasn't a courtroom or a boardroom, but the sun-drenched south gardens of Shadowfen Manor. They were working side by side, sketching out plans for a community arts festival they intended to host there, transforming a symbol of Thorn exclusivity into a beacon of inclusivity. Alara, her hands smudged with charcoal, looked up at Damien, her love and trust for him shining in her eyes. A quiet, unshakable confidence that had been so painfully earned. "We did it," she said, a soft smile playing on her lips. He reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady, his answering smile genuine, reaching deep into his gray eyes, finally chasing away the last of the shadows. "We did, Alara. Together." The simple silver ring, with its intricately engraved black orchid, gleamed on her finger, a quiet, constant reminder of their tumultuous journey, of the new beginnings they had fought so hard to achieve. Their love story wasn't a traditional fairy tale, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it was real. It was hard-won, and it was undeniably, beautifully, and irrevocably theirs. And sometimes isn't that the best kind of happily ever after? The kind you build yourself from the ashes of the old into something stronger, truer, and infinitely more precious? Dear friend, life has a way of testing us in the moments we least expect, casting us into roles we never chose, in places we never dreamed we'd end up. Alara's sudden entanglement in the Thorn legacy is not just a story of broken plans and veiled secrets. It's a reflection of how often we must find strength amid uncertainty. The Stoics remind us that it's not the events themselves that define us, but our response to them. Alara's resolve to face the silence of Shadowfen, the icy distance of Damien, and the mystery behind the black orchid, all while questioning her place in this grand facade, is a quiet kind of bravery. In every whispered doubt and cold hallway, she chooses not collapse but confrontation. And maybe, just maybe, that's the first step toward reclaiming not just her voice, but her power. Remember, sometimes the cage is just a chrysalis. If this story moved you, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps bring more powerful stories like Alara's to life.